John trusted his coworker with something personal. It wasn't meant for the whole office, just a quiet conversation between two people. But 3 days later, everyone seemed to know the same story. That was the moment John realized something painful about trust. Sometimes, the people who listen the most carefully are the ones who repeat your words the fastest. John had always been a private person. At work, he preferred to keep conversations simple and professional. Personal matters were something he usually kept to himself. Not because he didn't trust people, but because he believed that sharing too much could sometimes create unnecessary problems. For a long time, that habit worked well for him. But over time, there was one coworker who seemed different, someone who always listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. Unlike others in the office, this person seemed genuinely interested in understanding people. And slowly, without even realizing it, John began to feel that maybe this was someone he could trust. One afternoon during lunch, the office was quieter than usual. Most people had already finished eating and returned to their desks. John and his coworker were still sitting at the table, talking about ordinary things, work, deadlines, and weekend plans. Slowly, the conversation became a little more personal. His coworker asked how things were going outside of work, and John hesitated for a moment before answering. It wasn't something he usually talked about with people at the office, but the question felt sincere, and the moment felt comfortable. So John shared a small part of what had been on his mind lately. Nothing dramatic, just something personal that he normally kept to himself. His coworker listened carefully, nodding with understanding. There was no judgment, no interruption, just quiet attention. When the conversation ended, John actually felt a little lighter. What he didn't realize at the time was that those few sentences would travel much further than he ever expected. A few days passed, and life at the office seemed normal. John continued his work like always, focusing on his tasks and keeping conversations simple. But then he started noticing small things that felt a little unusual. One morning, a coworker looked at him with a strange expression before quickly looking away. Later that day, someone made a casual comment during lunch that sounded oddly familiar. It mentioned something very close to what John had talked about a few days earlier. For a moment, he wondered if it was just a coincidence. After all, he had only shared that conversation with one person. John tried to ignore the feeling and told himself he was probably overthinking it. But as the day went on, the strange feeling didn't completely disappear. Something about the situation didn't feel right, even if he couldn't yet explain why. Later that week, the situation became impossible to ignore. During a casual conversation in the office, one of John's coworkers mentioned something that immediately caught his attention. It wasn't just similar to what he had shared before. It was the exact detail he had mentioned during that private lunch conversation. For a moment, John stayed silent, replaying the memory in his mind. He remembered the quiet lunch table, the careful listening, and the feeling that the conversation had been safe. But now, the same words had somehow reached other people in the office. In that moment, the truth slowly became clear. The private conversation he had trusted someone with had quietly turned into something everyone seemed to know about. And that realization was far more uncomfortable than the story itself. That moment stayed in John's mind long after the workday ended. It wasn't really the story itself that bothered him the most. What stayed with him was the realization that something he shared in confidence had quietly become office gossip. At first, he felt disappointed. Not angry, just disappointed that a simple conversation had been repeated so easily. But over time, the experience began to change the way John looked at trust. He realized that not everyone who listens is protecting your words. Some people simply enjoy being the person who knows a story others don't. And sometimes, the lesson isn't about the person who repeated the story. It's about learning to be more careful about who we choose to trust. Trust is one of the most valuable things we can give another person. But experiences like this remind us that trust should always be given carefully. Not everyone who listens to our stories understands the responsibility that comes with hearing them. Sometimes the lessons that teach us the most about people are the ones we learn through disappointment. And while those moments may feel uncomfortable at first, they often leave us a little wiser than before.